weeks ago, my friend Foster and I were talking about the HBO Max show Our Flag Means Death. In talking about it, they said something along the lines of, we as the audience had gaslighted ourselves into believing that the show was not queer, or into believing that the show had been queerbaiting us. And I completely agreed with this assessment. Because upon reflection, I even remember seeing a tweet from Taika Waititi stating that it was an explicitly gay show. And yet I was still like, surely it's not. He's probably just pandering to the audience, but obviously that's not the case. So let's talk about it. As we now know, the show is extremely gay. In fact, I'm here to argue that it's more than just a queer love story, but a show that symbolizes a pivotal turning point in queer media in which queerbaiting itself will become a thing of the past. It does this by successfully creating the perfect slow burn romantic comedy with intersectional characters that love in a variety of ways. It also successfully creates an atmosphere of harmless hetero-baiting while being made by people who are true allies to the LGBTQ movement. But more on all of this later. First, we need to talk about what is queerbaiting. Why is it that myself and so many of my friends were skeptical about how queer Our Flag Means Death actually was? Why had I gaslit myself into believing that an overt gay romance between main protagonists was not actually attainable? I truly believed I was being queerbaited. I was resigned to believe that that was the case, and it wasn't until I actually watched the show that I realized it was queer. So what's queerbaiting, and how did we get to this point? In searching for a definition on queerbaiting, I decided to land on Judith Fatala's definition, which is a strategy by which writers and networks attempt to gain the attention of queer viewers via hints, jokes, gestures, and symbolism suggesting a queer relationship between two characters, and then emphatically denying and laughing off the possibility. Denial and mockery reinstate a heteronormative narrative that poses no danger of offending mainstream viewers at the expense of queer eyes. Queerbaiting as a term in and of itself has actually been around for a few decades. It began as a term to describe certain homophobic actions against usually gay men. However, in the 2010s, it rose to popularity as a term that described an industry tactic where those officially associated with the media text court viewers interested in LGBTQ narratives, without the text ever definitely confirming the non-heterosexuality of the relevant characters. The concept of this started in marketing with the term gay vague. Gay vague was coined in 1997 by Michael Wilk in order to make sense of ads with homoerotic themes, advertising that covertly targets gay consumers through the inclusion of ambiguous clues. This was an attempt to cash in on something called the pink dollar, which stemmed from the idea that gay men had higher disposable income and above average earning power, because the thought was that they had no kids and had high-paying jobs. Many scholars agree that the pink dollar idea was a myth that was based on a very small representation of gay men, usually white upper middle class gay men. But the idea was that straight consumers wouldn't be able to tell that anything was overtly gay, but gay consumers would be able to pick up on certain cues and choices. They also might not be aware that it's overtly gay or that it's being targeted towards them, but through these cues, the advertisement may become more appealing to them. A straight person may, for example, see two men in an ad and think that they are friends, but a gay person might see the same ad and make different assumptions. It's important to distinguish between queerbaiting and natural or perhaps unintentional homoeroticism. Before queerbaiting rose as a popular term and form of activism, the term ho-gay or homoeroticism, yay, was a term of celebration in fandom spaces that denoted the presence of queer circumstances and possible tension. A potentially gay circumstance may come from settings with a notable absence of women, such as war, prison, or boarding schools. Certain genres also lend themselves more to ho-yay, such as westerns or buddy films. In these instances, fans may not identify situations as queerbaiting, but instead see possibilities and unrealized sexual tension between characters. As Henry Jenkins points out in Textual Poachers, fandom blurs any clear-cut distinction between media producer and media spectator, since any spectator may potentially participate in the creation of new artworks. Tisha Turk and Joshua Johnson add on to this, saying that for fans of a show, much of the pleasure of watching a vid lies in supplying more meaning than the visual information alone conveys. What this means is that occasionally fans simply enjoy the tension and possibilities that homoeroticism itself provides, and are able to create their own works and analyses based off of these tensions. However, there's usually a pretty thin but clear line between unintentional or perceived homoerotic content and purposefully alluding to the existence of queer characters without actually giving any follow-through. As it turns out, there's a lot of different ways to queerbait, and I think it's important to touch on some examples before we get into the meat of this video. The first kind is what I'm going to refer to as a no homo kind of love. This is likely what you think of when you think of queerbaiting: two same-sex protagonists who obviously show care for each other and probably even share a few tender scenes. Yet the show's creators will insist over and over again that the characters are heterosexual and only heterosexual. Not bisexual, not asexual, but straight as a rod. I'm talking about shows like Supernatural, Merlin.
Where have you been?
Were you worried about me?
No?
You came back to look for me.
All right, it's true. I came back because you're the only friend I have and I couldn't bear to lose you.
And of course, Sherlock.
Want to see some more?
Oh God, yes.
For all of these shows, fans can clearly see some sort of romance between the characters, but when they try to bring it up, they're often gaslighted and laughed off by producers and cast members. The other kind of main queerbaiting that we have is one that I will call "we have gays." Kind of. This kind of queerbaiting brings in queer audiences by superficially allowing for queer characters in a manner that is less than satisfying. Examples of this include the series finale in Legend of Korra, in which the relationship between Korra and Asami become canon. While it was thrilling to see representation, the series had previously included relationships between men and women that had included kissing and other more overt references to relationships. Korra and Asami definitely had tension that the fans picked up on in season 4, yet their big scene together consisted of some hand-holding and gazing at each other. It's ambiguous, and mainstream or straight viewers could still interpret it as a just friends kind of thing. Other examples of superficial representation include stating that a character is gay, but doing basically nothing in the text to support that statement. Or else, in like the case of Thor Ragnarok and Wonder Woman, using interviews and source material to characterize female characters as bisexual, without ever including anything about it in the film. This kind of queerbaiting occurs when producers want the credit for including queer characters without jeopardizing the studio, show, or film, or sacrificing their mainstream straight audiences. One of the creators of The Legend of Korra, Brian Konietzko, even said he knew they weren't doing much for LGBTQ representation, but they were unsure if he could even get away with doing what they did. Luckily, we now know exactly how much shows can get away with in terms of representation while still remaining successful. Finally, we are here to talk about Our Flag Means Death, the pirating show that took the world by storm earlier this year and soared in popularity even after its final episode aired. The series follows Stede Bonnet, a noble who runs away from his wife, children, and posh lifestyle in order to pursue an adventurous life as a pirate. With no experience in pirating and an unwillingness to commit violent acts, his crew initially hate him. But eventually they grow fond of his strange ways and ever-present failures as he teaches them the ways of a more prestigious life. Eventually the series takes an interesting turn when Stede meets Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard. Blackbeard is having trouble finding adventure as a pirate since he's so feared that nothing really seems to be a challenge to him anymore. Stede Bonnet walks into his life and boom, an unlikely friendship develops as Blackbeard joins Stede's crew. Eventually their relationship goes from friends to lovers as the series progresses. But, and I cannot stress this enough, many fans thought that their relationship would never develop or could even develop beyond friendship. So let's talk about the fan anxiety behind this romance. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that my friend and I thought we were being queerbaited when the show came out. We knew that there was some tension between Blackbeard and Stede, but we had seen too many shows where the tension never actually amounted to anything. It turns out we weren't the only fans with that fear. The show's creator, David Jenkins, stated in an interview with IndieWire that they had always intended for the show to be a romance, yet he was surprised when viewers didn't seem to believe that it was happening. For him, it was a realization of how deep the fear ran and how badly years of queerbaiting had affected audiences. A large part of the reason the fans feared that the romance would never materialize was due to the incredible slow burn that followed a plot of a will they won't they romantic comedy. They had the meet cute, they had the friendship period, and they had the jealous ex, all before Steed and Ed ever actually admitted their feelings for each other. The slow burn aspect of the story was absolutely necessary for telling an effective and compelling love story, but since any sort of ambiguity usually means it's not going to happen, fans assumed it wasn't going to happen. Because of that, we have an extremely new phenomenon happening that Lair Carcass terms as heterobaiting. I prefer straight bait since it's shorter and it rhymes, but I did not come up with the concept, so I do not get to name things. Carcass explores straight baiting in an essay that uses the show Black Sails as a case study, and yes, that does happen to be another gay pirate show. The show purposefully hides the gender of the mysterious lover that Captain Flint is seeking out, so that when it's revealed he's looking for, gasp, another man, it's scandalous, and the viewers feel pretty betrayed. In contrast to Black Sails, Our Flag Means Death straight baits in a way that still sets itself up for queer romance. The trailer focuses more on the comedic aspects of a man leaving his comfortable life for a life of adventure that he's clearly not ready for. It shows exciting action, funny one-liners, and certainly some pirate mischief. But the ship's flag isn't a rainbow and cannons don't shoot confetti, and the trailer doesn't end with a giant sign that says, "This show is gay as." That's honestly what makes the show so good. It's definitely a show that's meant to be a queer rom-com, but the queer part comes so naturally. The show emphasizes who the characters are as people before anything else, not who they are as gay people. When I say that the show symbolizes a pivotal moment against queerbaiting, I say that fully knowing that queer media has much more prevalence than ever before. We're lucky enough to live in an era that features characters who are unapologetically queer, yet they can also leave us wanting. For many queer characters, their queerness is presented as the source of their anguish. It is the hurdle that makes them different and potentially unlovable. They overcome this by coming to terms with who they are and then coming out to everyone who knows them, risking it all in order to find happiness. Because of this, it sometimes feels like we can't have queer protagonists unless the character's only problem is being queer. The flip side of this is having characters who already know they're gay and are at peace with it, but relegating them to supporting roles, with the underlying message that queer people are side characters whose love lives are inconsequential in comparison to the main heterosexual protagonists. In Our Flag Means Death, Steed and Ed don't have a huge identity crisis about their love for one another. In addition to that, Steed and Ed aren't the only queer couple on the show. Lucius and Black Pete develop a relationship throughout the first season, starting with casual sex and then escalating into cuddling and Black Pete calling Lucius babe. Jim is a character who is originally disguised as a man and is hiding from Spanish Jackie. When the crew finds out they aren't a man, they ask what to call them. Jim states that they just want to be called Jim, and the crew accepts it without further questioning, immediately and effortlessly using they/them pronouns for the rest of the season. Jim and Oluwande also have a burgeoning relationship throughout the season, which means we are now at a total of 3 queer relationships. Not only is there an abundance of normalized queer representation, but there's also quite a bit of diversity and intersectionality going on. Because let's face it, a lot of gay representation we see tends to be in the form of white men, and that's just not realistic to the experiences of most gay people. And the diversity, again, feels effortless while not ignoring factors of race. Just like how race isn't ignored, these characters don't live in an idealized world where homophobia doesn't exist. It's just not all there is to their story. Once Lucius finds out Jim's real gender identity, he proves he can keep it secret by stating he was able to make his mother believe that he was into women for a number of years. This suggests that his mother wanted him to be into women and was perhaps disappointed when he was not. It's also made clear in flashbacks that Steed was bullied by his peers and his father for liking things like reading books and picking flowers, as opposed to more traditionally masculine pastimes like war and murder. Izzy Hands, Ed's right-hand man, is also dealing with some internalized homophobia throughout the season, as he clearly has a thing for Blackbeard, but also attempts to mock Lucius for seducing members of the crew. Despite Izzy's open disgust at Lucius's actions, it's clear Izzy happens to be the odd one out on this ship, and the crew gang up against him as opposed to turning against the seductress that is Lucius. A large part of queerbaiting are creators gaslighting the audience into thinking they're stupid for ever suggesting that there might be gay subtext in a show. That is, again, where Our Flag Means Death is different. It's not just that the subtext is just plain out loud text, but the creators of the show also make sure to show their allyship for the LGBTQ movement in loud and proud ways outside of the show's script. They make sure that everyone knows that the show is queer on purpose. They share fan art instead of laughing it off, and they are clearly regularly practicing allyship in their day-to-day lives. And yes, I know some of the creators on the show are queer, but that doesn't always give them a free pass. It is really nice knowing that queer people helped to make this show, and I'm sure that is part of what helps it to avoid stereotypes. But queer people have certainly worked on shows that are queerbaity, such as Mark Gatiss, who is an openly gay man and co-creator of BBC's Sherlock. He also emphatically denies any sort of homoerotic tension between Sherlock and Watson. And I mean, come on.
You ripping my clothes off in a darkened swimming pool, people might talk.
Now remember when I was talking about Hoye? You may be thinking that Our Flag Means Death doesn't leave enough to the imagination. Some fans expressed surprise that the will they won't they struggle between Ed and Steed was resolved within the first season, since many other shows like to draw it out for a long time. Where is the homoerotic tension that leaves fans on the edge of their seat wanting more? Where is the food for fans who want to leave some ships open as they explore what might be in fan art and fan fiction? To that, I have a few points. Number one, to do anything less than make the love of Ed and Steed concrete would hurt fans. A recent Mashable article by Jess Joho stated that, at the very least, the show is allowing us to learn to love and trust again, after so many years of our thirsty yearning going ignored and outright exploited. The article talks about healing the wounds of Super Wholock, which was a mega fandom that included Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock, and left many fans disillusioned with media that teased queer possibilities without ever actually doing anything about them. Point number two, fans are doing just fine creating their own content and storylines without being left hanging. TikTok user Cecilia Is Grey tracked how much fanfiction was being published about the show and saw that after the last 2 episodes came out, the fanfiction grew from about 8 pages worth to thousands of pages on AO3. For reference, the last 2 episodes came out together, and the second to last one is the one with the kiss that confirms Ed and Steed's love for each other. Overall, fans reacted overwhelmingly positively to the inclusion of the kiss. The creators of the show also brilliantly split up all of the couples in the show by the finale, meaning fans are creating their own alternative happy endings or else guessing as to how season 2 will lead them back together. But also, queer people just want to see queer romance and will respond positively to good depictions of queer romance. It's that simple. All this to say, the bar has been set, and it's been set by Our Flag Means Death. So many excuses for queerbaiting comes from the idea that shows or studios won't survive the inclusion of gay characters or plots, or else that if they include a gay romance, then the entire plot has to be about the queer journey that the main character must go on, and it can no longer be about anything else. Forget about adventure and piracy and funny quips, it's rainbows and pride parades from then on. And that's simply not true. When the season finale of Legend of Korra came out, Mary Sue writer Katie Schenkel said LGBT fans shouldn't have to settle for anything less than explicit representation. And she's right. We deserve nuanced, diverse, funny, adventurous love stories that are explicitly LGBT. And we can have that. We can have our cake and eat it too. Our Flag Means Death is the turning point. It's given us a taste of what could and should be, and I'll be darned if I settle for less. So next time a movie about a miserable gay white boy comes out, queer fans will have the knowledge and support to say, no thank you. And when a show gives audiences 2 queer-coded straight men and seasons of them flirting with each other while its producers laugh, fans will have other content, better content that they can turn to. It's time for us to switch the channel and find our own happy ending.